Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast,
the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Senior Rehab Podcast. Today on the show, we have Becca Jordre. She is a physical therapist and associate professor from the University of South Dakota. She was actually referred to me by a listener, David Gillette, at Geriatric PT for those on Twitter, which referred speakers or podcast guests is highly encouraged, so you're always free to do that. But Becca Jordre, she's doing some amazing work with the National Senior Games Association, where she's collecting data and putting a lot of these athletes through objective measures and screening them and finding some really, really cool outcomes and getting some data that will hopefully heavily influence how we view and how we treat older adults. So we dive into that topic, also considerations when working with older athletes. So I know you'll appreciate this one and you will gain a lot of value. So without further ado, let's get into this interview with Becca Jordre. Becca Jordre, welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk with you because you have quite the experience with senior athletes, which I do not. So I want to pick your brain on this amazing topic because it seems like every other day someone is tagging me or emailing me some video of a 100-and-some-year-old deadlifting 400 pounds or running 400 meters in 50 seconds or something crazy like that. So I'm excited to talk to the person that works with these people.
I get all of those emails from everyone I know too.
Oh, I love it. So tell us a little bit about your career up to this point, kind of the quick and dirty.
Okay. Well, the short version is I worked mostly in outpatient ortho. I was in Duke's first DPT class and did not expect to work with athletes. I told everyone I would do anything but sports.
Yeah.
That's how it always happens. And
it's usually the other way around. That's interesting.
Yeah, I was interested in staying in outpatient, but not sports. I didn't want to work with athletes. And I took a position at USD on faculty because I said I would teach when I got old. Apparently, old at that time was like 31.
That's funny.
And they needed someone to teach geriatrics, and so in the process, I sat for my GCS. And had enough hours for my outpatient experience. And in the process of studying for my GCS, someone in South Dakota asked if I would put together a quick screen or some kind of activity so we could get involved with the senior games in South Dakota as a promotional like PR activity for our SDPTA organization. And so I scoured the research for a good fitness screen for senior athletes and came up empty-handed. Everything was a bit too easy. So I made one. And that's essentially what has become what we call the SAFE, the Senior Athlete Fitness Exam. I drag my students with me every other year to the National Senior Games. And we have been doing that now for 6 years. Well, essentially 3 different senior games nationally. And we've collected data on about 1,600 senior athletes across their 19 sports in the National Senior Games. Being able to work with them has been a treat. They didn't have anyone doing senior games. I guess I skipped the step where we did it in South Dakota, and I called the National Senior Games and said, I just don't want to reinvent the wheel. So what are you guys doing? And they said, nothing. You want to come?
Wow.
So I've kind of been their go-to researcher since then. That's awesome. And have been fortunate enough to be able to test a lot of really fit older adults.
Yeah. So before we dive into that topic, I want to go back to your kind of educational days and the early career. When you were at Duke, what did you want to do?
I started off wanting to do neuro rehab, which I still love.
Mm-hmm.
And my second pick at that point was outpatient ortho. And I just landed with a really cool mentor who was actually trained in Australia. And I couldn't go back, I guess, once I had worked with him.
Yeah. When when you saw that position at South Dakota and they wanted you to teach geriatrics, what was your first reaction?
A little bit of hesitation. I actually have a cousin who is a physician, and he said, only the fuddy-dudds do geriatrics.
Wait, could you say that again? The what?
Yeah, only the fuddy-dudds
I've
do
never
geriatrics.
heard that before.
So those are his exact words, and he's a family practice physician. And I was like, I sort of like sometimes proving people wrong.
Yeah.
And I was really eager to be in a teaching position. I think my options at that time in the faculty were being the research person or the geriatrics person. I was like, well, I definitely don't want to be the research person, ironically. But yeah, so I didn't really hesitate. I think I was just eager to get my foot in the door.
What was the perception of the students, you feel like, when you first started, in terms of perception of geriatrics?
Oh, terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. It wasn't a course with much emphasis, and it definitely wasn't a course that was fun. I think in their eyes.
Knowing what you know now, how can you make a class like that fun?
So that's my job every day now.
Yeah.
I think it's the most fun class here at USD. But
Awesome.
a lot of exposure to what geriatrics really is. I mean, I think coming into it, and certainly maybe anybody's predisposition is, old people, stuffy, walkers, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think the more actual patients that they are exposed to, even before they go out into the clinic, and the more stereotypes I can break ahead of time, the better.
Yeah.
So I drag all my, anybody I can find in town who is 80 years old and running,
Yeah.
or doing something crazy or just funny and witty. Then I like to drag those people into class and say, "Hey, talk to my students. Let's do something."
Yeah.
And we have a good time that way. So
tell us a story of one of the most impactful classes that you've had, in terms of when you've had that interaction with student and an older adult.
Two different times. One was a time when I guess a student. Well, I'm gonna go with the my local favorite patient, I guess.
Yeah.
And she's never been a patient. She just turned 80, and she literally, I was sort of at a loss for what to do for class one day, and I decided to have the class meet at the wellness center here, and decided, let's look at ways that we could treat older adults in this environment. And so as we were working, one of my sort of favorite older adults from town was there working out, and I said, "Wow, would you mind if we just practiced a quick interview on you?" Like, she had said something the week before that her back was bothering her. I was like, "Can we just?" And that started an interview where we had the students interview her that week, and then the next week she came into class, and we all sort of tag teamed an evaluation of her. And at that time, she'd actually stopped running because she was having pain.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up running her through a series of tests, giving her some basic advice, and that summer she ran 5K.
That's
so
awesome.
The students loved her, and she had actually been a teacher, so she was nice to have in class and very complimentary of the students, and played along really well. But she's, I think, training for a half marathon now.
My
and
gosh.
She just had her 80th birthday party with her friends. So we're, she's pretty close to the USD PT department that way. But the other thing I was going to say that I thought was impactful and didn't have a lot to do with fitness was, we had a panel of older adults come into class one day, and I just really remember one of the students saying, "Would you pay cash for PT if I could give you PT and we would just pay, cash and leave insurance behind?" And the the participant said, I wouldn't trust you if you didn't take Medicare. I would think something was wrong with you or your profession. And I thought that kind of blew everybody away.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't what we expected. I just remember it being one of a sort of a interesting statement from someone who was, I think he was probably late 60s, early 70s.
What did he say about that? Did he expand on the why?
I think because his explanation was more that his generation trusted those governmental sort of institutions, and that those were solid. Those were what gave you cues as to what was safe and solid. And
so there's some credibility behind being associated with those programs
with insurance. I mean, just at a time when we were all kind of looking other places. It sort of drew me back into, okay.
Well, that's awesome. Let's jump into the senior athletes. So you do this screen that you developed. What are the components of this screen?
But broadly, we look at their basic health history to the extent that we know if they've had a fall or have any major health issues or comorbidities. We look at cardiovascular risk factors. We do a quick measure of strength, quick measure of flexibility, and a quick measure of balance and / mobility. We throw gait speed in there at the end.
Okay. How do you do that in particular in terms of the strength and flexibility?
Right. So for strength, we actually look at grip strength and we look at 5 times sit to stand.
Okay.
Because we can get a pretty good global measure of both upper and lower extremity that way.
Yeah.
And for flexibility, we just hit the shoulder. We hit shoulder flexion. We look at gastroc length. So with the knee straight, we measure dorsiflexion, and we do a Thomas test.
Nice. So from these tests and the data that you're gathering, what are you seeing certain patterns or what useful information are you getting from this?
Right. A ton. It's sort of endless.
Yeah.
Probably the most interesting or most consistent finding is that on any given test, almost every test, the athletes perform so far above the norms that we expect that we're resetting the norm for people to exercise. And some of these people don't exercise excessively. I mean, I would say the majority of them are exercising more than, national recommendations. They're exercising every day for at least an hour, lots of them. But there's some in there that are more recreational. And still, if you think about it, everybody that we've tested is over 50. They can all do the Thomas test. And I just think there's a lot of times in clinic where that's something that I can't do because people just can't even get into that position.
That is crazy. Explain the Thomas test for people that have been out of school for a while and aren't familiar with some of those ortho tests.
Oh, so it's just a quick test of hip flexor length, which we know the hip flexors get tight as we sort of get stooped in age. And they sit on the edge of a plinth and they bring their knees to their chest and roll back onto their back. And so with one knee to their chest, the other leg's dropping down. And if their leg can clear past the edge of the plinth, sort of drop down, so the back of their thigh is going to touch the plinth, they essentially pass and would have, in theory, about 8 to 10 degrees of hip extension. So their other knees pulled up. And almost all of them get into that position even on their own. Mm-hmm. A few of them we help. A few people need a pillow under their head when they're in that position. But it's that one's been consistently amazing to me.
Yeah.
Because I keep waiting for it to fall apart. And we're almost going to throw it out because everyone does so well.
That's crazy. And that is not, I mean, just from, I'm coming from the home health perspective and just the patterns that I'm seeing with my patients. Granted, none of them are necessarily senior athletes by any means, but that seems like that would be a test where they would struggle even, to get into that position, let alone, do well. But granted, I know that's completely different population as well, but
and that's kind of why it's been hard to figure out how to test this group too, because to make it hard enough, and still tease out problems is the hardest thing.
Yeah. And there's so much variability, I'm sure, amongst that crowd in some manners, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool to see what you're doing, because what, that the senior games, the senior athlete games, those people right now are not the majority by any means of older adults in terms of their physical activity levels or
Right.
capabilities. But as exercise has been preached for a few decades now, that's definitely changing. And so, I mean, it's going to be wild to see, in 10, 20 years of what the typical older adult will look like and how they'll function. And it's almost, I wonder if you almost have like a glimpse into the future of what geriatrics may be more similar to, down the road.
Well, I guess that my hope is that it's a future where we're more involved, but I do see it statistically, actually, numbers are growing in the folks that are trying at least to engage in exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those people that I really hope that we can say, hey, we can be the person that can help you. We have a lot of information to help you, because they're trying to stay engaged in exercise. But even a lot of these folks who are signed up and qualifying for National Senior Games, they don't know what they're doing. And I say that very respectfully, but they just haven't had anyone explain where they could get hurt, how they could be better, faster, stronger, more balanced. Of course, the piece that when we test these folks, that their jaws drop is when we test their balance, because they're running track, they're swimming, they're doing triathlons, and they really have a pretty high perception of, I'm fit, I'm pretty fit, I'm way more fit than my peers. And then we test their balance, and their balance is better than their peers, but their balance is far worse than they could have ever imagined. So they're usually humbled, they're frustrated, sometimes a little mad at me.
What are their perceptions of you when you're working with some of these people? Do they see you as a professional that could be beneficial to them, or are you just someone that's exposing their flaws or doing some tests that they don't see as very valuable?
They're hungry for what I can tell them.
That's awesome.
Most of them. Yeah. They really, really want to know everything that I can tell them.
Yeah. What have you seen patterns in terms of how they become informed of training or exercise in terms of their go-to resources and how to implement some of this stuff?
Right. So a lot of them have a trainer. Or go to a gym and use a trainer. Some of them were involved in sport when they were in high school, and they're still doing that same sport. And some of the most engaged, come from like a senior community where, like the villages down in Florida.
Okay.
They're all so engaged in activities. And it's more just, there's a group of people playing pickleball, so I'm going to go play pickleball with them. And that's how I learned. And now my girlfriends are going to go play tennis, and so I'm going to go play tennis.
Yeah.
And next we're going to go for a walk or do some other activity. So yeah, I guess there's a variety. I've seen a few like senior sneakers or silver sneakers, but not that many. Mm-hmm. And a lot just saying, I'm going to put my shoes on and go because I can.
That's awesome. So working with them, how has that informed your training in terms of not necessarily right now, but how do you think you're going to be training at their age? Say, let's just throw 80 years old down.
Mm-hmm.
What will it look like for you?
It's already changed. And I will say, what's exciting about teaching geriatrics is I feel like I'm cheating. And
how so?
We should all feel like we're cheating, because we can see, like you said, you have a glimpse into the future. Like, what do I need to prevent? What do I need to work on right now? I was a runner, hardcore runner, just a runner. And I am definitely now mixing up my my training already. So more swimming, more biking. I took up volleyball because it's good to sometimes throw yourself on the ground and do crazy sideways moves that your body doesn't expect.
Yeah.
So I definitely changed to really less intense running, more play. All of these people are motivated. Not all of them, actually. Lots of them are motivated by the competition. But the folks that are the most, from my perception, happy and doing the most volume are playing.
Yeah.
So the more the more exercise can actually be fun, social, playful, and very diverse. That's what I changed to, and that's what I hope. I mean, I'm already looking at. I think I could do all of this when I'm 80. I'm gonna keep doing it. I'm gonna keep doing it this way.
And I love that question because it definitely forces you to just think big picture, and especially what we're doing now. And that's something I think about with the climate that we're in terms of the fitness climate of just a super high intensity training and just, getting after it, pushing yourself to the point, that you have rhabdo and, just all these issues that we're seeing with some of this very high intensity activity, which I know is good every once in a while, but I definitely question the frequency of it that you see. And,
Right.
I'll say the C word, CrossFit, that can be a common thing. I know it's not across the board by any means, but I've just been, I have experience with a few boxes to where that is the norm. And I just think of, when you're 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, what is that going to look like? How will that have an impact on you? And what can we do now just to make sure that we are still active, we don't get hurt, and we have that habit of the healthy lifestyle going forward?
Yeah, these folks, I don't see a lot of CrossFit in this group. They're really wise when their bodies tell them something.
Yeah,
they listen. They don't stop exercising, but they do adjust. And there's more I want to research on how they're strength training, but it's different, I think, even than we think it should be right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would agree. And I don't know a ton about CrossFit, but is it really fun? And is it a game that you're going to keep playing? I'm not sure. I think, maybe if you're there's a few out there that'll say, yep, that's what I'm going to do when I'm 80.
Right.
Go for it. But I think that you have to look at it not as a means to an end, but as a lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. So how is your work informed? Like say you're someone like me, just a home health PT or back in the outpatient clinic, how is your work with the senior athlete games informed just kind of the regular clinician? What lessons can be learned?
Well, I think in a nutshell, the biggest thing would be look what happens if someone stays active. Look what's possible.
Okay.
So what's possible with the human body and not selling our patients short, because a lot of these senior athletes didn't start until they were 50 or 60.
Wow.
One of my great student experiences wasn't really in the classroom, but it was a student that I took to National Senior Games. We tested 800 athletes. Then we came back to South Dakota and we went to the state senior games. And so we tested a different level of athlete who was maybe a little less, intense. And we saw some differences in function. And then we did a health fair at our senior center on Falls and saw a much lower level of function. And I remember this student he happened to volunteer for all three of those. And he looked at me and he goes, this is an interesting spectrum, like to see how people have changed in these environments. And they could be the same age, but I've seen them essentially, in his mind, the same person in three different settings. And that's what I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the human body is much more tolerant to more intense activity. And I know that's sort of the CEEAA, push.
Yeah.
But I would really reiterate that it's possible. We can't throw our patients into it like all at once, but but we could keep encouraging them to, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Why not start an exercise routine?
If you were back in your outpatient job, how would you portray that to your patients?
I still practice.
Okay.
So I tell them all of this every day. I say, you can keep going. And I think it helps most, my middle of the road patient who's just starting to show some decline.
Yeah.
And I'll say, hey, if we do this, you don't have to lose this function. Do you want to keep it? Because I can show you how to keep it.
Yeah. That's amazing. Do you have, I can just see like that clinic with all these kinds of posters with these older adults doing these crazy things, or TV screens with the videos of the big deadlifter, or the woman that broke the 100-meter record and all that stuff.
No, not quite. I work for
quite,
somebody else, and I just work PRN a couple of days a week. But yeah, and I think I don't want to turn people off with some of those ideas, because that's not even me. I'm not a competitive athlete.
Mm-hmm. I'm
the worst volleyball player ever. But I love to throw myself on the ground playing volleyball.
Yeah.
So I think it's more just about just being involved, and then winning, or being, it's fun to see those people that maintain it. And I think they're special because they just kept doing it.
Mm-hmm.
They're maybe not, anything actually that amazing, except for they didn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something that I struggle with on a regular basis is just with a lot of my patients, I see the potential in their ability to increase their capacity. But so many people, in terms of like athletics, in terms of, even exercising, a lot of people just that I work with don't want to, and they don't want to be active per se. They want to be able to do things. But in terms of that path to get there, a lot of people just don't have interest. And, I'm sure there's many factors there, but especially with being viewed as an athlete. Just a lot of the patients I work with don't really care for that at all. And I think something that I'm constantly just working with is trying to change perceptions, but trying to implement some of the principles that you're learning, with those athletes, with the person that could care less about sports or exercise per se. And to try and change their perception just to increase their activity levels. But what I'm learning is that it's education is not going to do it. It's definitely a long process to help form behavior and influence people. But I'm not a very patient person. I've struggled with it. But
well, I mean, we test in senior games. We even test shuffleboard players.
Yeah.
And bowlers. They just have a recreation, right? And we still test those folks, and they're not as fit as the triathletes, but they're still more fit than the couch potatoes.
Yeah.
So I think anything that gets you up and out the door, whether it's just walking, and lots of them just have walking as their exercise.
Yeah.
But even bowling, it's a very different sport than sitting and watching TV.
Yeah.
So anything. But I ask my students at the beginning of every class, how old is the age when you get that ticket where you can stop? Like when you get to stop exercise? And they look at me like I'm crazy. Figure out what that age is.
Yeah. What's the youngest age that someone has said? That'd be interesting.
Well, they know as soon as I say it. they just kind of stare at me like, and I'll say, when was the last time you did a somersault? Because they're like 20 something. And mostly we've all stopped, why did we stop?
Yeah.
That was a bad idea. If we hadn't stopped, then we could be on a YouTube video when we're 90, because we would still be able to do one.
Could be going viral by now.
Right.
Yeah, that's going to be the norm. That's what's going to be wild, is all these videos that you get emailed and tagged on Facebook and Twitter or whatnot. That's probably going to be the norm, and not too in the near future for sure.
There's going to be a lot more
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
So let's wrap things up with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
If you could talk to your 25-year-old self, what would you tell her?
Start volleyball now.
Really?
Yeah. I ran too long.
Yeah. Did you get to the point of injury in terms of doing too much running?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all do, I think.
Yeah.
If that's all you do.
Right. I'm right there with you. I was definitely a chronic runner, and I mean, I enjoyed it, but I definitely started to see what it was doing to my body or movement capacity, I would say.
Right.
So I took up some kettlebells, and I've really enjoyed parkour. That has definitely kept me on my toes and challenged me. I've done lots of falling as well, like you have with volleyball.
Yeah.
That has been healthy. What are some of your favorite apps or technology or pieces of equipment that have been helpful with your work as a PT?
I don't use stuff, actually, I would say.
And equipment can be exercise equipment.
Yeah.
Well.
Quite honestly, like HEP to go, my online exercise, so I can just send out exercises to my patients. But I like to do bare bones so that they can do it at home. And I don't use a whole lot of other aids.
Yeah. HEP to go. I'll link that in the show notes for sure. What's been your most helpful continuing education?
I did like the CEEAA. It definitely recapped what I had studying for my GCS, and I think it is pushing the edge of geriatrics into where we need to start looking. I think we need to even refine that further. But it's definitely pushing PTs in the right direction. So I think it's definitely a worthwhile thing for geriatrics.
Could you tell us what that stands for people that aren't familiar with it? I know it's a long one. But.
So, certified exercise experts for the aging adult. And it takes you through a lot of functional testing and evidence-based exercise, and makes you stop and think a little bit about what are we doing. And I think it's very compatible with our aging baby boomers.
Yeah. A lot of people that I've interviewed have that GCS behind their name, and then they've also done, it's a series of weekends, correct? The CEEAA?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And have had awesome things to say about it. So that's on my to-do list down the road for sure.
Yeah, you'll like it. You'll be good at it.
I don't know about that. I like it. I don't know if I'll be good. We'll see. All right. So last question here. Let's say we're at CSM. You have every geriatric rehab clinician in the room. You have their attention for, 30 seconds to a minute or so. What would you want them to know?
Oh boy. That they don't already know. I feel like they know everything. I think keep pushing. Set your standards higher
For the patient.
for the patient.
Yeah.
Yep. Expect more. Allow more.
Yeah, that's a very consistent theme
Yeah.
on this podcast, and it's very refreshing to hear. And I think it's very powerful coming from someone like you that is working with some of these athletes that are creating some of these viral YouTube videos and doing these amazing things in terms of their physical capacity. It's just really cool to see. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your work and just working with these people and developing a screen and taking all this data that I know is going to heavily impact the future of our profession. For sure. I mean, just the data that you're getting right now, I'm sure is just gold.
It's fun.
Yeah. So
It's really fun.
I appreciate it. If people wanted to pick your brain on what you do and how they can get involved in the senior games, is there a preferred way to pick your brain?
Probably my email is best, and I'm always looking for people that want to get involved because there's a lot to be done at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just my first name, Becca, my last name, Jordre, @usd.edu.
Okay. And I'll have links to that in the show notes and links to the National Senior Games
Cool.
as well. So once again, I appreciate your time and thank you for getting up at the butt crack of dawn this morning.
Thanks, Dustin.
Hit me. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. The show notes and much, much more can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. I want to encourage you to go there so you can join me and many others in the movement that's changing the face of geriatric rehab. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com, click join, and you'll be able to get access to our private Facebook group, which can basically serve as your virtual mastermind group. You'll get a short and sweet monthly email from me with useful links for you and your patients. And lastly, you'll get 10% off your first purchase from the Senior Rehab store. So all of this can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. And until next time, my friends, do not forget to stay funky.